Well, we're in a series where we're saying imitate me. And we're not saying imitate me out of pride, like I've got it all together or you've got it all together, but we are saying, here's the way I do it. Here's something that will never lead you astray. Here's a way that I read the Bible, that you could read the Bible, and this will always lead you in the right direction. Here's a way that I pray, and you could pray this way. You don't have to be afraid of praying. You don't have to learn some big, long formula. Here's the way I do it. Imitate me. Here's the way I tell my story so that somebody can hear about my spiritual journey, and you heard some examples of that. And then you heard Larry Gates this last week talk about, here's how I stay kingdom curious. Here's how I expand my territory throughout my life so that I don't become dull. I don't become calloused and hardened. So today I want to talk with you about a subject that I'm not sure I'm very good at this. But on the other hand, I just want to tell you, here's how I do it. Imitate me. Here's how I friend. And I don't mean on Facebook, because I make a lot of people mad on Facebook because I'm way behind. I've got like 99 requests to be friends. Actually, I've got 250 requests. But let me talk to you about here's how I friend. So I brought a tool with me today. Several years ago, a friend of mine took me to a kind of a trade show down at Seven Corners Hardware down in St. Paul, the greatest hardware store in the world. I love it because you can't find anything in there. It's stacked 30 feet high, and they have little gnomes in there that help you find stuff. And I love that kind of place, you know. And you wander around, and you go, man, I didn't know I needed all this stuff. And we went down there, and it was a tool day, and you know, cabinet makers and woodworkers have a hard time when they're joining things at a right angle like this. It's an inherently weak joint. And, you know, we don't have time to make dovetails and fancy stuff like that. So there's a company named Kreg, K-R-E-G, that makes this little fitting here that you clamp onto the end of a board, and it makes it so you use a specialized drill that they have, and the drill is made so that it drills in and it stops at the right depth, and it also drills a pilot hole so that you end up with a pocket. I don't know if you can see that little pocket, but in that pocket you put a screw in there, and you can hook wood together at a right angle like this. It makes a very, very strong joint, and that's of course on the back of the door. It's called a pocket screw, and this little jig. This is the simplest of all of them. They've got a whole line of tools now, and you can see me afterwards. I'll sign you up. I'm a distributor. Now, this is the simplest one they ever made, I think, and that's the one I've got. But my friend bought this for me. And so every time I use it, I think about my friend. And I think, you know, not only did he give me something, but he also taught me something by giving that to me. He introduced me to something new that I might not have known. First of all, he invited me to go down there. And then secondly, he bought me this. So if you'd like to be my friend. No. There's an ATV show somewhere. I really liked one of those. Or a Volvo, you know, I like one of those. But how do you join two men together? How do we connect with each other? And that's a mystery for a lot of us. That's a longing for all of us. How do I have a friend? How do I find somebody that's really my friend? And that's not just a need for a group hug. You know, that's just not a need to be in some beer commercial. That's a genuine longing that all of us men have. How do I really find a friend? And David Smith wrote a book years ago called The Friendless American Male. And that's a chilling title. He says, men have different problems than women, many of which are self-inflicted and therefore avoidable. One serious problem is the friendless condition of the average American male. And then he said this sentence, and many perceive this as normal. And I've said this just by observation, and I've said it in many places. I think I've said it here many times, and Nobody has contradicted me, so I'm declaring it to be true. But it's sadly true that most men over the age of 40 don't have that friend. I'm not saying you have to have the best friend, but most men don't have that one or two or three guys that they can make that 3 a.m. call, or they can drop in on, or they feel speak into their life, or they feel like I don't have to apologize for who I am, or I can speak my mind to my friend, or he can speak to me. And there are some reasons for that, and some of them are cultural. They're not blameworthy issues. But, you know, I've been in a position many times when I've met with somebody, and usually my conversations start something like this. Well, we didn't know who else to talk to, so somebody told us to call you. You know, so I know a crisis is coming. And so 8 minutes into the conversation, we've got tears, we've got snot, we've got horrible stories, we've got meltdown, and I'm talking to a man about the deepest part of his life. And so maybe that meeting happens 2 or 3 or 4 more times. And I've been in the awkward position after doing that with some guys over the span of my ministry where I've had a guy say, you know, you're my best friend. And I go, I don't say this out loud, but I go, you're in trouble. I mean, not because I lack, but because, really? We spent 3 or 4 hours together, and I'm your best friend. First of all, I feel a huge responsibility, but secondly, I feel sorry for the guy thinking, man, I can't take up a big enough part of your life to really be your friend. Of course, I want to receive him and give him empathy and listen to him in the hours that we have together, but have you ever been in that position where somebody thinks you're their best friend and you're going, wow, we've spent so little time together? Well, we want to talk about this today because if our growth in Christ is to be encouraged by the gifts and the character of another man, if we're to be challenged and accountable to another man, if our coworkers and our extended family and our neighbors are to sniff the aroma of Christ in us, then we need to connect. We need to find that connection. We need to find a way that we can have relationships and be friends. And one of the great examples in the Old Testament is David and Jonathan. And just a quick flyover of them, and it's in your notes. And you've got some blanks to fill out, by the way, today. And I hope you'll take your notes with you so you'll remember some of this stuff or review it. Or you can say to your wife, here's what I learned today. Just a quick overview of Jonathan and David. They were bonded in spirit. It says that David loved Jonathan as he loved himself. There was a bond there. Remember now, Jonathan was the son of Saul, the reigning king of Israel. And Saul was a dark personality. Saul was jealous of David. Saul was vengeful toward David. Saul was violent toward David. And Jonathan, Saul's son, was David's best friend. What an awkward position to be in. But their spirits were bonded together. They made a covenant relationship that they would stay by one another. Their friendship was tested with trials. They had a common opponent, which was Saul. They kept renewing their covenant. They counseled one another. They were friends through absence and war. They sought one another out. They found each other. They encouraged one another. And then David's best friend, Jonathan, was killed in battle. And oh, how the mighty have fallen, David wept. And David wept over the loss of his best friend, Jonathan. And then after this happened, you remember that David had this affair with Bathsheba. You know, he was home one day on the rooftop of the palace, and he should have been at war. It was springtime. It was time to make war, and he sent the troops off by themselves, and he looked at a woman and found her bathing on the rooftop and said to one of his servants, you know, I'd like to get to know my neighbors. And he invited her to dinner, and the affair took off, and you remember what happened. David had a child with Bathsheba, or she was pregnant. He tried to hide it and brought her husband home from battle. He would not lie with her to cover up the pregnancy, and he sent him into battle to lead the battle, and he was killed. So David was an accessory to murder, really. All that happened. And after that, at the height of all of his power, David began a descent as a leader. And we can only speculate, but I think it's a pretty fair speculation, that the lack of having a friend, the lack of having somebody that he saw as a peer, as an equal, who could speak into his life, who was not intimidated by his position or his money or his fame, not having Jonathan there significantly, I believe, contributed to the demise of David as a leader. The rest of his life was troubled. Remember Absalom, all the stuff that happened in his family. Some of that, of course, we never know what the cause of that was, but what a tragedy that David lost his friend and no one would speak into his life like Jonathan could do that. Well, I want us to take a few moments right now in threes, no more than three, and look at these questions on your page. And just let's take a few minutes and just let's bring some of this out of the background in our own lives and ask yourself these quick questions. We're just going to take about 5 minutes to do this, so it's got to be brief. So get in threes real quickly, scoot your chairs around, and let's tackle these two questions that are in your notes, right? Can you read? Okay, you can read. Let's do it. You can do it in twos as well, but do it quickly. Morning. All right, guys, let's regather. Maybe just talking about it reminds you that you should be very grateful that God has allowed you to have a friend that you can really talk to. And you need to celebrate that and be very grateful. Just like we take other things for granted, we can take our friendships for granted. Maybe also it aroused an ache in you that, you know, I have had friends, but for some reason, whatever it is, I can't name somebody or those 2 or 3 guys that I really know and who know me. And maybe there's an ache in your soul. You know, I want that. And that doesn't mean you're defective. What it means is there's something that God is stirring in you. So what I want to say is imitate me in this one way. There's one word, I think, that describes the give and take of friendship, and it's the word exchange. Exchange. There's a blank there you can fill in. E-X-C-H-A-N-G-E. All right, it's on the screen. What's an exchange? An exchange is a place where we trade, we risk, we invest, we speculate, we anticipate, where it's mutually beneficial. There's giving and there's receiving, there's sharing. You know, 50 times in the New Testament it talks about one another. Well, that obviously is a reciprocal kind of a relationship. There's a reciprocity in friendship. It's an exchange. It isn't one way. Well, here's a Sunday school quiz for you. Who's the best example of a friend? There you go. All right, let's close in prayer. Well, you knew the answer to that. What are friends for? Well, Jesus is the best example, but let's not make that something that's unattainable. Let's just break down a couple of things about his friend behavior. And we could give multiple examples of this, but we haven't time to do that. But there's 3 things here that Jesus obviously shows us about what a friend is. Number 1, he was selfless. He was selfless. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lays down his life for his friends. Now, you don't have to promise on the first coffee opportunity you have with a friend to lay down your life. But there's multiple ways that we lay ourselves down for friendships. We make room in our schedule. We offer to help. We enter in. We become more vulnerable to them. There's ways that we lay ourselves down. It says that Jesus was a friend of sinners, which means he had to go a long ways to be my friend because I'm a sinner. And he came into flesh, he came into this world for one purpose, and that was to be a friend of sinners. Not to just tell them what they wanted to hear, but to genuinely lay down his life and lead them somewhere they needed to go. And that's what a friend is for. And we are so afraid of male friendships in this day and age because we're afraid if we really say to somebody, I'm your friend, or I love you, or I admire you, that we're viewed as gay in some way. There's all kinds of cultural pressures on men, so that we always have these 180 relationships. You know, we face something together, but we never have this 90-degree relationship where we share something in common, or we never have this 0-degree relationship where we go face to face. Jesus was selfless because he wanted to express his love to me and to you. Secondly, he was proactive. And he modeled this in his own life. He also said it to Peter. He said to Peter, feed my sheep, but he said, strengthen your brothers. Go after them. The most proactive guy I can think of in the New Testament other than Jesus is Barnabas. You know, whenever somebody needed a friend, when they were in trouble, or when they just needed somebody as a scout, they would send Barnabas. And he was proactive about that. And you can do that. You can call, you can text, you can drop by, you can help. There are many ways we can be proactive about friendship. And a lot of this, guys, is just carving out some margin for it. We're just so busy. I know that young dads are so family focused, and I love that. But we become so child-centric in our culture that there's no room for men to relate. And that's another whole subject, but I'm concerned about that. The third thing that Jesus modeled was that friendships were reciprocal. He says, I call you friends. And he says, you are my friends if you do what I command. He wasn't making it legalistic. He was saying, do you believe in me? He wanted the disciples as friends. And he didn't walk 6 inches above the pavement. You know, he wasn't, levitating his whole life. He called them. He sent them. He trained them. He depended on them. He asked them. He gave them responsibilities. He sent them on a mission. He helped them. He needed their prayer. It was reciprocal. It was back and forth. It was not mercenary. Jesus wasn't saying, I'll make you a friend as long as you do what I want you to do. He was saying, I want you to be my friend, and we're going to share this mission together. So, will you be my friend? That's the question. Have you noticed how young boys make friends? The first 5 minutes on the playground, they run up to somebody and go, will you be my friend? There's no filter for little boys. My grandson's 9 years old and plays on a hockey team. There's 3 boys named Carlson on this team from different families. So you never know which Carlson is playing out there, but these little guys are just bonded. Everything they do, they discover together. And there's an advantage to that because they have everything in common. They go to the same school, play on the same team, they're the same size, they're learning the same stuff, they're working through all the same things. But we get to a place where we outgrow our friendships. And how does this happen? Well, it happens because our vocational track starts to diverge. Sometimes our economic status starts to diverge. Many times we were friends, but our wives are not. And it's harder for us to be friends. Our time gets encroached upon. One of the biggest issues is mobility in our culture. I grew up in Golden, Colorado until the age of 17. And I had friends there from 1st grade to 11th grade. And then we moved to California for my senior year. I spent a friendless year my senior year. And, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't any fun either. And then I went to college, and I got on cross-country team, a track team, made friends there, had deep friends. Then I got married to Joanne, and we moved from California to Colorado. So each time we moved, this was not the age of Facebook and email and all that. That was basically a cutoff of those friendships. And I'm having my 50th high school reunion actually this year. I'm not going. I don't know anybody. Anyway, I don't want to go. I don't want to be with a bunch of old people. But each time that disrupted my friendship. I had to start all over again. And then Joanne and I were in Denver for 19 years through seminary, and we pastored in 2 churches. We had deep friendships there, and then in 1991 we moved here and cut off, we didn't cut them off because we wanted to, but just distance meant we need to start all over again. And then I work in an occupation that has a hazard to it, and that is that people often cannot see me outside my role. So on the golf course, somebody goes, nice shot, Pastor, and it ruins the whole day for the other foursome. They've outed me, and now everybody speaks, stained glass language, and there's no sailor talk going on anywhere because my tender ears can't hear that kind of thing. But also the struggle for me is that I take Monday. I've always taken Mondays off. The dirty little secret of pastoring is you don't get weekends. You're working all weekend. So getting together with people was difficult. So it was very difficult for me when I moved here to Minnesota. It seemed like everybody's friendship agenda was already filled, and my schedule was opposite of theirs. And so it was difficult for me. So I'm just saying that I've experienced that myself, the disruptions of life. If you've moved several times, you've changed occupations, you're living in a different part of the city or a different part of the world, it's difficult to maintain those relationships because we're not in the same community anymore. But the other thing that contributes to this is what I call the man code. And the man code is that we must be self-contained and unflappable and competent at everything and inexhaustible and strong and untouched by the struggles of our life. And because of that, we become isolated. We become these bubbles of self-sufficiency. And that's particularly true in our culture, our Nordic culture. It's certainly true of me. You know, in many ways I can say, you know, I'm just fine by myself because I like myself. No, but I'm an introvert anyway. But I have this longing to be with friends, as I'm sure you do. And the more extroverted you are, the more raging that fire is inside of you. So let me just give you a quick overflight of we could be friends, how friendship really starts. And look at this diagram, and it's really a diagram about the deepening nature of communication, and we'll handle it quickly. But at the top of the pyramids is this. It's cliche kind of sharing. It's elevator talk. Hey, it's finally warm out. Yep, sure is. Ice is melting. No, it's not. You know, we just, you know, it's nothing that could ever hurt you. Look at these two diagrams. Number one says the amount of yourself that's showing at this level is basically zero. You're not disclosing anything in the elevator about yourself. And the amount of emotional clothing you're wearing, you're dressed like a snowmobiler at 40 below zero. You know, nothing can penetrate you at that level. This next level down is sharing of the facts. It's just facts and data, and this is often an office kind of relationship. You can work beside somebody for years or work in the next office with somebody and you don't know anything about them. You just know that you got your report in on time, they got theirs in on time, you do copies for them, you share information with them, and you have a common task, but it's just facts. And when you're doing this, you're still dressed in a suit and tie. You're formal, you know, nobody gets past the role in this area. Then there's opinion. Well, that's sports talk and political talk, and that's kind of having lunch together. This is business casual kind of clothing. There's more of you showing, and you're a little bit more vulnerable because you're basically saying, this is how I think about something, and it's not just facts, it's also how it's been processed inside of me. But then there's a water line. You could draw a little wavy line there. There's a water line, and here's where friendships begin. And you're not going to like this word. It's called emotion. Feelings. Now, you don't have to say the word, but this is where you begin to unmask. This is where you take off your shirt and you say, here's a scar. Here's something I learned. Here's how it's feeling right now. Here's a fresh wound that I have. Or here's someplace I want to go. Here's a muscle I'm trying to build. And you risk that with somebody. You say, this is how it feels to me. This is what I'm going through. And this doesn't make you more of a Christian when you get to this area, but it makes you more known as a believer. This is where brotherhood begins. And if we're just around kicking tires and talking about the Vikings and talking about the fishing opener, that's fine. I mean, that's life. We have a lot of fun above the waterline. And we can't always dive deep. You know, you can't always just go off the high dive and just go here automatically. But if we're going to have friendships, at some point we need to do this. We were at a dinner last night with some friends, and we were talking about all the stuff above the waterline. And my wife, who maddeningly always asks piercing questions, but she's brilliant at it, she changed the whole conversation. She said, 6 of us were there, she said, I just want to ask you this question. As a grandparent, what's the most rewarding thing about your grown children, and what's the most frustrating thing? Change the whole conversation because we started talking about what's going on inside. And we had an hour talking about that, and we'd exhausted all the other subjects. This is what a friend does. Some of us are like a can of Coke that's been shaken up, and there's nobody there to open it and let the pressure out. We're only safe to do this with a few people. And that's why we need a friend. At least a friend or two. And then the deepest level here is transparency. And I hate to say this word, but this is when you're dressed in a Speedo. All right? You know, the level above this is how I feel, but this level of transparency is this is who I am. Here's who I am. Here's how I feel like I've failed. Here's where I'm launching toward. Will you believe with me, even though there's very little in my life right now to show it? This is where I want to go. I'm telling you, I'm letting you know, bare, naked skin, this is what I want in life. And a friend will say, you go, guy. You know? Or, here's where I've really failed. Here are the places where I have the hardest challenges. Here's where a friend can pound the table and vent and wallow and spout off. And his friend will say, you know, I'll be here tomorrow for you. This is the kind of transparency that Jonathan and David had. So I'm asking you today to do some bit of rummaging, a bit of personal inventory. Are there some man habits that could change in your next appointment with someone? And you don't know if they're going to be a friend or not, but you could go a little deeper, depending on what the purpose of that coffee is going to be, what that appointment is going to be. Are you discovering that you seldom go deeper than certain safe subjects, that there ought to be something else that you could talk about? And do you recognize that you could be that friend to someone and model to him what it means? Because that's really what it takes. I'm in a group of men who study, and one of the guys I love is a pretty rough-cut diamond. He's a believer, but he's got a pretty salty mouth, even in our Bible study. He doesn't even recognize it. But what I love about him is he's so transparent. And whenever he shares, it changes the whole conversation. Because he's willing to risk some transparency. So let me just give you some tools. How you can get this connection going. Here's some questions you could ask. These are drill down questions to go deeper in your relationship. And you know, they're not all for the same conversation. Just here's one I ask all the time. Tell me about your journey. And an hour and a half later, we're both late to our next appointment. And by that I mean, just tell me, where did you know, and there's opportunity for question. Tell me about your journey. Guys go, well, I grew up in Waseca and I moved to Minnesota when I was 25. Oh, well, hey, what happened in high school? You can ask questions along the way, and pretty soon you start getting life events. And you can also ask, tell me about your spiritual journey, which I do all the time. Here's a question. What do you want? People are going to, well, what do you mean? What do I want? No, what do you want? Just let it lie there. What do you want? You know, you will hear, if you just let that sit there, you're going to hear some of the greatest longings as a guy begins to verbalize and unpack. What do you want? Well, I want bacon on my hamburger. Okay, well, yeah, beyond that. What do you want? Before the age of 18, who did you think you were? And since then, what have you learned about yourself? I love a question like that. How are you doing as a husband or as a dad? Wow, that's all about relationship and not role. What are the turning points or milestones in your life? And that's where a guy can share some of the things that he's learned, usually the hard way. And here's a sixth one that I didn't put down, and that is just ask for help. And this is true. I've said this at marriage conferences, kind of in jest, but I've said it here too. Ask a man to do something he can actually do, and he'll love you for it. I'd say this to wives. Stop asking him to do something he can't do. Ask him to do something he can do. But ask a man to bring his skid loader over to your house and lift something for you, and he'll love you for it if you're not taking advantage of him. Ask a man to debug some program for you. Ask a man to show you how to do something, and he will love you for it, because men love to be asked for their competencies. And that's how friendships form. So, I don't know where all this is going. It's going to your tables. What I want to just evoke is this. If you can imitate anything from me, it's that I'm constantly seeking, how can this exchange be genuine and not mercenary? I'm not selling you something to get you into the pyramid scheme, to get you to do something for me. How can this be a genuine exchange? And I'm learning that, guys. I'm still learning that. I'm trying to get out of my role and into relationship all the time. And God has blessed me with many, many friendships. But I still have to say, who are the 2 or 3 guys I could call at 3 in the morning and say, hey, I'm a train wreck. Come and get me. So talk around your tables. Let's stoke this fire, this longing for friendship. And I think that you're going to learn something from some other man around your table. So I've got some questions for you here. Let's talk amongst ourselves.